The lead detective of our department retired, and I was his replacement. Our department served a small town, only a few thousand people, so only I inherited one cold case of a missing woman. Since it was over 20 years old, all the leads had been thoroughly picked over. As I dug into the case, I soon found out there was a very likely suspect. He was seen giving her a ride the same day she disappeared. Aside from him admitting he gave her a ride, there was no other proof of foul play on his part. Later, he was arrested for killing 2 other women exactly like the missing girl. Over 20 years, he admitted nothing about other cases. Everyone in the town knew it had been him who did something to the missing Mary. 2 days after the lead detective retired, the man died of a heart attack in prison. The entire situation was simply unfair. She was so like his other victims. It wasn't likely he just dropped her off somewhere unharmed. He always hinted at having more victims buried, but now it was impossible to know. The bastard took it to the grave. I still went over the case, desperately trying to dig up anything I could. I was working long hours and arrived before anyone else, and I was still there when they left and the night crew came in. I'd taken a break by the coffee machine to pour my 5th cup for the night when I heard 2 of the janitors talking. I was only half paying attention, not wanting to listen into their affairs, but something they said made me eavesdrop. Ross, the older cleaner, had taken his wife to a man who was known around town as a psychic. Rumor had it, he was able to talk to the dead. Ross's mother-in-law had just passed away. They went to him for some sort of information, and the man ended up digging up an entire side family no one knew about. His mother-in-law had given up a baby for adoption before his wife was born, and not a soul knew until the psychic started to dig. However, he did not claim to come by the information with the powers people assumed he had. He simply stated he was just really good at digging up dirt on people. He did not want payment, and refused to call up the spirit of the deceased mother, claiming any further information would just bring harm to the family. The janitors moved away from me and started to work. For the next few days, the idea rattled inside my head. I hated how the thought rotted away at my brain. I was trying to justify going to a complete stranger for help on a case. I wanted to show him what was available to the public and keep it unofficial. It was like hiring a private investigator. I hated how many good reasons my mind came up with, even though he was a man claiming to have special powers. Or at least didn't do a good job quashing the rumors saying he did. Legally, getting his help was in a big gray area. I kept telling myself this was a bad idea. But that next Saturday, I found myself getting his name and driving to his place out of town. It was just outside of the town, surrounded by cornfields. It was the middle of summer, so the corn had just started to grow. His house was an old farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been updated in at least 100 years. I wondered if it even had indoor plumbing. I walked onto the wooden porch, it creaking the entire time. I knocked on the door a few times. An old beat-up car was in the driveway, but that didn't mean he was home. The car didn't even look like it could run. "Hello? Mr. Hote?" I called out and knocked again. I thought I heard faint clucking noises coming from the back. There was a big backyard, so maybe he owned chickens. I would check behind the house, then leave. After all, I didn't actually think he would be of any help to me. I just wanted to get rid of the thoughts invading my work efforts. "Mr. Hout?" I called out once again when I was halfway to the back. "Just come around back. I'm too busy to meet you." A man's voice called out to me. I did as he told me. I was right about the chickens. He must have had 100 of them roaming around. There were impressive-looking coops lined up behind his house. Each coop with its own theme. One looked like a dollhouse, and another like a courthouse. Clearly, someone put some time into building them. A tall man was working away measuring wood, starting on building another house for his pets. These had to be pets. I didn't think someone who put the time and money into such complex and impressive structures could kill the chickens he spoiled. They must be for eggs only. The man I was looking for had his back turned to me, hunched over a board of wood he was measuring for a new house. By the looks of it, he was trying to make a mini castle. A chicken sat on the table he was working on, overlooking his progress. He straightened up to address me, and I saw just how tall and thin he was. His black hair was long and tied back out of his face. Dirt covered him from his long day of work. His clothing was meant for chores based on the holes and faded color of his jeans and button-down shirt. He looked pretty normal until he turned around and my eyes were met by a pair of red ones. "They're colored contacts," he explained when he saw my surprised expression. "Can I help you, Mr.?" He was looking me over, trying to figure out if we had ever met before or if he was expecting me. I wanted to call ahead of time, but found it impossible to find his number. "I'm Detective Charles Moore. I was hoping..." That was all I could get out before finding myself with a face full of angry feathers. For some baffling reason, he had thrown the chicken that had been sitting on the table right into my face. It fluttered and lost feathers trying to get back on the ground safely. He tried to run from me, only to trip over his own tools, falling flat on his face. On reflex, my body moved. In under 10 seconds, he was handcuffed on the ground. I had no reason to handcuff him, aside from the face full of chicken. If he was running from me, then I wanted to at least know why. "Did you seriously toss a chicken at me?" I asked as I helped him sit up. "No comment," he muttered. "If I uncuff you, are you gonna do it again?" "No comment," he said more harshly, sticking his nose up. "You should at least apologize to the chicken." He ignored me for a few seconds, then very softly said a small, "Sorry, Betty," to the poor bird. This was a waste of time. I didn't know why I bothered coming here. "Why did you try and run? Doing something illegal over here?" I didn't expect him to answer, but saw the gears turning in his head. "It's a reflex around cops. I ran with a bad crowd, but I'm out of that now. And I'm growing a certain plant. Only one for myself. So you can see why a detective randomly showing up freaked me out." That was a fair answer. I honestly didn't care about any kind of illegal grow operation, as bad as that is to admit. I knew of at least 5 people in town that had a big operation going on. This guy would have made it on the list to watch if he had anything like that in his property. And I was currently in the wrong here. I handcuffed him for, in a way, assaulting an officer. I also just arrived onto his land and could be treated as trespassing. I considered freeing him, but the shifty look on his face and chicken within arm's reach made me reconsider. "So why did you come here? Heard rumors I lived up to my last name?" He smiled and I dismissed him. "I heard you could talk to the dead. I don't believe in that stuff. You're apparently good at finding things out. I was hoping you could look over a few case details and see if anything jumps out at you." He looked offended, even though I was giving him some praise. I really couldn't get a read on this guy. "I don't talk to the dead. I'm a necromancer. It's different. And unless this case is very interesting, I don't have time playing gumshoe." Well, this was a wasted trip. This guy clearly had issues. Calling himself a necromancer? As in raising skeletons and zombies from the grave? I was more offended by that idea than the chicken to the face. "Alright, I'll leave you alone," I replied very quickly, wanting to get out of there. "You don't believe I'm a necromancer, do ya?" The look I gave him was answer enough. "I can prove it. Just go with me here on this. It'll only take a few minutes, and all you need to do is hand me that wooden box." I looked between him and the small box he was nodding towards. I thought he might be crazy and had some sort of weapon inside. I would check in the box before handing it to him. I didn't want this to be a wasted trip, so I decided to humor him. I took a peek inside to see a dead chicken tucked inside, surrounded by wildflowers. He then stood up and traded the box for my handcuffs. I looked at him, confused on how he got them off. I still had the key in my pocket. I was certain I closed the cuffs so tight not even his thin wrists could slip free. Not my first time being cuffed, he said with a wink that made me take a step away from him, wanting some distance. I watched him as he placed the box down on the hard-packed dirt. The lid came off and was put aside. He suddenly looked very focused as he drew a very impressive, perfect circle around the box in the dirt. I know you're thinking I'm some sort of crazy, handsome bachelor, he started. I thought one of those things. I so rarely get to show off my skills. Rats got a hold of this poor girl earlier today. Working with fresh corpses costs less sacrifices to make move. For this, I already have everything I need. Some writing, a corpse, the body of the one who murdered the one I'm raising, and some magic words. Since you're here and watching, you need to say the words as well. What words? Like alakazam? Don't be tacky. It's bibbidi boobidi boo. I really should have left by now. I was absolutely not going to say that. Although I was impressed by the show he was making of it. With his finger, he drew more symbols and strange writing in the dirt. Inside the box, under the flowers, he pulled a dead rat to place outside the box. It all very much looked like a ritual that could raise the dead. He impressed me with his artistic skills enough to stay and see where this was going. Within a few short minutes, he drew a complex system of symbols around the wooden box. I would let him say his magic words and then ditch. Arms crossed, I watched him still on the ground in front of the box, speaking in a language I didn't even have the faintest idea of. It sounded a bit fake. He wasn't being overly dramatic, as I expected him to be, though. I even humored him enough to say the very embarrassing, childish words, although very softly after he glared at me, when I did not repeat them the first time. After it was all said and done, I thought the circle and symbols glowed very faintly. I assumed it was just a trick of the light. When nothing happened, I was about ready to leave. I took one step, then froze. The chicken in the box twitched. Its body started to spasm for a few seconds before going still. I wondered what kind of trick this was. If he drugged the poor thing to make it appear dead, I might have to take him in for animal cruelty. I watched as it sat up, and clumsily fell out of its small coffin. On unsteady feet, the chicken started to take a few steps around. Dead eyes, seeing nothing. Listen, I don't know what you gave it to make it look this rough, but please put that poor thing out of its misery. Clearly, this whole thing was some sort of scam. Dead things just don't get back up and start walking around. He either drugged it or trained a blind, injured chicken. BB the second, please show him the neat trick I taught you. I felt disgusted just being there. I needed him to listen and know just how much I disliked this chicken torture. Listen, I'm about to... Oh, holy shit! I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I tripped on my own feet and fell back onto the hard ground. The chicken in front of me, that looked very much dead, started to turn its head around. Entirely around. I heard a disgusting creaking coming from the thing as its head did a 360-degree spin, then just kept slowly spinning. I knew owls could turn their heads like that, but didn't think chickens could. And even if they could, I doubted they could just keep twisting their necks around. Its neck started to look like a twisted rag, and it still didn't stop. I felt like I was about to be sick at the sight. I looked over at the strange man, expecting some sort of explanation. Instead, he just looked back at me with an expression on his face like a proud child, showing off an art project and expecting a gold star. I just couldn't believe this man brought it back from the dead, even with the proof still spinning right in front of my face. For the next hour, he did everything possible to prove the chicken was real, dead, and moving. I finally had to accept what I was seeing. Thousands of questions ran through my head, too many to ask at once. The strange man beat me to asking the first question. What about that case you came here for? I wanted you to try to dig up some dirt on a cold missing persons case. The man who we think is most likely to have kidnapped Miss Mary died in prison, I explained, sitting in the dirt, completely shocked. Oh, where is he buried? I only stayed a few minutes more after he asked such an ominous question. We made plans to meet up the next day and go grave robbing. I could look up where the suspect had been buried, and he wanted to finish the new chicken coop before he started a new job. While I was driving home, I did think about how insane this whole thing was. I couldn't believe I not only let myself go over to his place, but had been talked into another meeting. Backing out was not an option. I did not want to commit a crime or disrespect the dead. I also didn't want the family of the poor missing girl to not know her fate for much longer either. After all, I was only going to dig up a dead body with a necromancer. What was the worst that could happen? I arrived first at our agreed meeting spot. Dressed in dark clothing and a shovel in my trunk, I felt like an idiot. For the 1000th time, I questioned myself what the hell I had gotten into. As time passed and no necromancer, I started to get annoyed. I almost gave up on the whole thing before I heard a car struggling to get down the road. So that beat-up car of his could run. Being a necromancer and all, I guessed he could bring all sorts of things back from the dead. Seeing his iced coffee, I was even more annoyed he didn't value my time in the slightest. "Follow behind me if your car can even make it. I know where he's buried. It's only an hour drive," I told him. I had gotten out of my car earlier to pace angrily around, waiting for him to show up. "Go? Right now? We haven't even discussed payment for this job yet," he said with a loud drink from his straw. "Mr. Hout." I was so angry I could kill him. "As much as I love being called hot, I actually go by Neff." I really was going to end up killing him if he kept on like this. "Neff, then. I know you're offering a service. I'm fairly certain no one else can. However, don't you think closure for these families is payment enough?" "You can't eat closure. How about something simple? Dinner and a movie. Me and you, nice steak place, and a rom-com after." "I'm married," I lied. "She doesn't need to know." "And have kids." Bigger lie. "I love kids." I could barely stand being there talking with him. Sparing a meal together would be impossible. That smug grin of his looked so fake on his face it was off-putting. I had a feeling he was trying his best to appear aloof and flirty. But for what reason? It was easy to see he didn't really want to go out, but just said it to be annoying. Why make me dislike him this much? "If you do this, and we can get some leads, I'll go to a movie with you. An action one. And there must be a seat between us." "Buy me a tub of popcorn and you have yourself a date. Let's go. Let's take your car." I didn't even have a chance to back out or stop him from grabbing a hefty duffel bag from his back seat and then climbing into the passenger seat of my car. He even honked the horn when I didn't follow after him fast enough. I just stared, trying to collect myself so I wouldn't deck him while leaving. It was pitch dark when we arrived. I had a vague idea of where the grave would be. I couldn't see anything, but Neff walked around just fine in the dark. Risking a flashlight would not be a good idea in case any security saw us. I just needed to trust him that he could find the grave in the dark. It took a while before we stopped at a small marker bearing the name of the dead man we had questions for. I was carrying 2 shovels and held one out to Neff. He didn't take it. "Necromancers never do their own digging." There was no sense arguing with him. I wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as I could. Wasting time trying to get him to do something he adamantly refused wasn't something I came there for. I soon found out that digging was hard work. I took off my coat and rolled up my shirt sleeves. The cool night air chilled my sweat, making me feel hot and cold at the same time. If someone came across us now, I would not be able to talk myself out of this. I was digging a grave to steal a body. No way to get around that fact. Neff acted as a lookout. I suspect he mostly sat on a tombstone, munching on some sort of snack he brought along. He did not offer to share. I tried not to let myself think about what I was doing. In my mind, I was just digging. I hadn't accepted the fact that there was going to be a corpse at the end of this task. A refusal to acknowledge that fact kept me going. My arms felt sore and my hands shook from the effort. The skin on my palms felt raw from the work. Only stopping for a few times, I had dug for hours. Morning may arrive before I was finished. Exhausted from the effort, I froze when my shovel hit wood. The realization of what I was doing finally sunk in after that hollow noise. I was digging a grave. I was standing above a dead body about to steal it because I was convinced Neff could resurrect it. Neff picked that moment to nearly give me a heart attack by jumping into the grave next to me. The coffin below us gave a groaning sound threatening to crack from our combined weight.
"You're done. I can lift this out."
Neff was a thin man. Until that moment, I hadn't thought of the fact that we had to remove the coffin. I'd assumed he would just do what he needed and the zombie he created would crawl out of the grave. Whatever the plan was, I didn't know it. I just listened to him. Shortly, I found out why the coffin needed to be removed. The hole was just deep enough for it to be difficult for me to lift myself out of it. If I couldn't do it, then I had no idea how a zombie would have the strength to crawl out of its grave. After a few minutes of struggling, Neff gave me a hand by pushing me up and out of the grave, although I suspected he was just trying to cop a feel. Taking a well-deserved break, I sat in the grass, waiting to see how Neff would manage getting himself and a coffin out without my help. It turned out to be very easy. Lifting the coffin up and over the top of the grave, he slid it onto the grass as if it weighed nothing. In one swift movement, he was out and brushing himself off. His arms were much thinner than mine, and he looked like he could barely support himself on his legs, let alone lift anything even remotely heavy. "How did you—" I asked, a little dumbfounded.
"Do you like what you see?"
Neff replied, posing and not missing a beat. Then he got serious. At least, as serious as I've ever seen him. Opening up his duffel bag, he started to reach around inside, pulling out a strange assortment of items. Risking some light, I turned on the flashlight to see what he was doing. When Neff became focused, he was fast. Wasting no movements, it was like he did this routine 100 times before. First, he adjusted the coffin, placing it in a spot where he had room to work. Using a large bottle with a spout, he poured white sand in a circle. From where I was sitting, the circle looked perfect. I wondered how much practice it took to be able to make perfect circles every time. Around the circle, he made more of that strange writing, but only one line around. I thought raising a human would be more complicated than a chicken, and required the same amount, if not more, symbols. Those symbols look a bit like the cartoons my nephew likes. The main character's missing an arm, I think, I commented, remembering back to very quick glances at the show I had seen.
"It's called anime, and shut up!"
I stayed silent and watched him work. From his bag, he produced dried flowers. Too many to have reasonably fit inside the bag. Ripping the coffin open with one hand, he started to arrange the flowers around the body. I couldn't bring myself to look inside. Digging up a body and looking at it are two different things. I expected there to be candles and chanting, maybe some chicken sacrifices. There was none of that. Just Neff writing more strange things on the coffin in chalk. For some reason, he took some dirt out of the grave and placed it inside a jar. I wasn't sure if that was for now or later. Out from his bag came the last two items. A bracelet made of what looked like to be threads of silver, and a polished wooden board with a small, matching wooden hammer. Facing away from me, he stood straight and began speaking in some ancient language. He spoke for a few sentences, ending the ritual off with knocking 3 times against his wooden board. I sat holding my breath, waiting to see what would happen. No lighting or dramatic flashing lights. Nothing extraordinary happened, aside from a dead man sitting up in his coffin. The sight nearly made me sick. Turning away, I needed to collect myself. Being a convicted killer, I wondered if anyone would pay to have him embalmed, or if he was just tossed in the cheapest coffin and then put in a cemetery owned by the government. The image of his half-rotted corpse trying to get out of that coffin chilled me down to my very core. The wind blew the smell in my direction, making me retch. I'll admit, I wasn't doing as well as I thought I would be. I just wanted to get the answers and get out of that damn place. While I was averting my eyes, Neff put some car air fresheners on wherever he could hang them from the corpse. The mixture of those two smells made it worse. "Can you just ask him about his victim so we can get the hell out of here?" I nearly begged him, still hunched over and almost about to get sick.
"What, ask him? Does this thing look like it's able to talk?"
I could kill him. The shovel was so close. A few good swings would be all it would take. "What do you mean he can't talk? What was the point of doing all this if he can't talk?" I was on the verge of becoming hysterical.
Did you really think I could bring back a dead man to the point where they're talking and looking all shiny and new? Alright, I am that talented, but it takes a great amount of sacrifice you do not want to make. And even if we went down that route, to making him able to speak, he literally took his crimes to his grave. I am making rotting flesh move, not bringing people back to life.
I think he could tell I was getting angry and raised a hand to stop me so he could keep speaking.
Because I am so talented, I am able to cheat death and get some bits of information that rightfully should have died with him. Instead of a person telling me where he buried his victims, I'm connected directly into his past emotions and memories. I can't point to a map telling you where he's buried, but instead it's like a homing pigeon, you know? Instinctively, I know which direction to go to find them.
I collapsed in the grass, dirty and tired, trying to figure out what Neff was getting at. We could still find the victims. Who knows how many were out there? I'd wished in that moment I asked more questions about this whole thing beforehand, so I could be more prepared for it. I let my eyes drift over the corpse stumbling around. He was such a bastard in life, harming women and making the family suffer by never revealing their resting place. At least now there was a chance to change that. So now what? You just walk around pointing me in the right direction? I asked, sounding tired.
I prefer to drive,
Neff replied. I sat in the grass thinking as I saw the sky was starting to lighten. We had to grab our zombie and leave soon. I didn't even think about if we should refill the grave before we left. I just wanted to shower and go to bed. You're not making up bullshit, right? Like, this thing could talk, but you're just making us do the long method to make me hang around for longer? Neff let out an offended gasp at my comment.
I have never been so insulted in my life. There is no truth in that at all. I am certainly not keeping you around, hoping I have future chances of accidentally touching your butt,
he said with fake offense. I really needed a shower. I stood up brushing myself off as best as I was able. A horrible thought came to me. Does that mean we need to take him with us? I asked, looking over at the rancid-smelling, stumbling corpse. Neff smiled and nodded, and I groaned at the fact that I'll never get the smell out of my car. It took some frantic planning on my part to get things arranged. After dropping Neff back at his car and watching him drive off with our new zombie, I started on getting some time off work. We had no idea how many undiscovered victims were out there, and how long it would take to find them. They could all be local or all over the country. I was able to get a week off work, even though I was the new lead detective in the department. Even with such an important job title, it wasn't as if there was much need for me in the area. I arranged that I would pick up my necromancer and the zombie at his place early the next day. It would give me lots of time to get well rested and prepared for our strange road trip. To my immense annoyance, I found Neff not at home the next day. This was back before cell phones really became popular. I had one for work, but Neff didn't. I waited at his place petting the chickens and watching as the zombie kept bumping into things. He was on a leash, and Neff had dressed him in a large sun hat and sunglasses. At a distance, you couldn't tell he was dead. When I heard Neff's ancient car driving down the dirt road, I went out front to meet him, ready to give him a piece of my mind. I said bright and early, I snapped at him before he even got out of his car.
This is bright and early for me. Besides, I needed supplies,
he replied, not looking concerned at my anger. Again, he had bought an iced coffee. That pissed me off. His supplies were just a mountain of snacks he piled into my back seat along with his duffel bag. I brought a few changes of clothing, not knowing how long we would be gone for. I let him usher the zombie into the trunk and sprayed nearly an entire can of air freshener before closing it. Doesn't he need to see where he's going? I asked when the trunk closed.
Nah, he's like a homing beacon. Get in, we're late getting started.
Knocking that iced coffee out of his hand was very tempting. Neff got into my car on the driver's side. I don't know why I thought I would be the one driving. He knew where we were headed, but I still didn't trust him driving my car. But I needed to let it go and accept it. I cringed as he adjusted his seat to accommodate his long legs. It would take me forever getting my seat back to the right position.
Let's get this road trip started,
Neff said as he pulled out of the driveway and along the road. He shoved a mix CD into the player and foreign language music blasted. I shut it off. "This is not a road trip," I hissed at him.
Darling, you're looking for dead bodies off the books. Driving across the country looking for murder victims and not getting paid for it is total road trip material.
Before I could disagree, he put his music back on, turning the volume up so loud I couldn't hear myself think of a reply. This trip is going to be a long and frustrating one. I needed to let him have some small victories, or else I would not be able to get through it. I made a mistake within the first few hours of getting started on our body retrieval road trip. I used my credit card to get gas. Neff went inside to purchase even more snacks for the road while I stayed over by the pumps. Neff was tall and thin, and who knew where he put all that food he ate? When he found out I used my card instead of cash, I got an earful. As much as I didn't appreciate being treated like a child, I did agree with his point. I acted without any forethought. This trip was unofficial. No one knew what we were doing. If it came out that we found a body near where I bought gas, it may be very suspicious. I could not leave a trail or any connection to the case.
You have anyone in the area you can visit as an excuse of why you're traveling through?
Neff asked between eating handfuls of chips. My brother lives near here, but we should really get going, I protested.
Go see him. I'll drop you off, pick you up later tonight.
But
it's not like the bodies are going anywhere,
Neff pointed out. Again, he made a very good point. Somehow our plan of finding poor victims buried somewhere turned into some family time. I didn't get to see my brother and nephew very often. I just got busy with work and other adult things. He looked surprised when I showed up at his door, asking to stay around for the day, but glad for the time to see me. My nephew was getting older. He was nearly half my height. I remember him being up to my knees the last time I came around. I swore after this case I would come by more often. To my surprise, I was the cool uncle, and needed to start living up to my title. After dinner, Neff came by to pick me up. I said goodbye to my family, trying to avoid questions of who Neff was and why he was driving my car around. Thank God we kept the zombie in the trunk. I could not explain that. Overall, it was a pleasant trip before we got into the dark business of uncovering murder victims. Because we lost an entire day, Neff said he would drive through the night. He could stay awake for 3 days straight if needed. It was either a necromancer thing or from all the sugar and snacks he had eaten. Sleeping next to him was something I was not keen on at all. He non-stop flirted and attempted any kind of pickup line he thought would land. If I slept, he could turn off into a dark, empty road, do God knows what to me. He noticed how hard I was trying to stay awake as the night wore on. Turning his weird music off, he glanced over at me. When night fell, he'd taken off his sunglasses, red eyes showing. I didn't ask just yet, but I don't think those were colored contacts.
I'm not gonna do anything to you while you sleep. I like a challenge, and a sleeping target's no fun. We'll be hiking into the woods trying to find some dead bodies, so you need to get some rest.
I really wanted to trust him. I still felt like I wasn't entirely safe. No matter how I felt, I wasn't going to be able to stay awake forever. I finally gave in, praying he kept his word. Pulling my jacket over my shoulders, I adjusted my seat, trying to stretch out a little, to attempt to get some sleep. I suddenly envied my brother's talent for napping anywhere. Maybe when you become a parent, you just gain that skill. My eyes were closed for what felt like hours, but it must have only been a few minutes. I drifted between half asleep and half awake, doubting I would actually get any rest on this trip unless we stopped and rented a room. I was about to sit up to adjust myself when I sensed movement. I heard Neff's clothing rustle, and I listened to him shift in his seat. Keeping my eyes closed, I felt him carefully take my jacket and pull it up after it had shifted down during the night. Again, I wondered why he went out of his way to be flirty and annoying when he might actually be a decent kind of guy. We drove, and I just had to trust that he knew where he was going. Only stopping for restroom breaks and food, we finally arrived at a hiking trail through some woods I didn't recognize the name of. With no one around, Neff let the zombie out of the trunk and dressed him up with a sun hat and sunglasses, trying his best to make him look alive at a distance. My sense of smell adjusted to the rot, but I could still notice a hint of it in the air. If anyone came close, they would know for certain something was dead. We needed to avoid people at all cost on this trip. I started up the entrance to the trail. I couldn't stand smelling or even looking at the zombie, so I waited for them to join me. We walked along the trail with Neff leading the way, the zombie taking up the rear. Soon we went off the trail into the woods. It was so easy to get lost in here, I really hoped Neff knew where he was going. It was hot under the noon sun, even in the shade of the trees. I was sweating by the time we stopped in a clearing. Neff didn't look like the heat bothered him in the slightest.
There, under that tree. A woman is buried. Being so close, I'm able to dig into his memories. He thinks her name is Jenny. You don't want to know how she was killed.
Neff told me, never taking his eyes off the tree before us. Yellow wildflowers grew at the base of the tree. Someone had scratched an X in the bark years ago. It was faint, but still there. I guess the murderer marked the tree, in case he needed to dig up the body for some reason. All right, let's contact the local department and get them out here, I said, trying to keep the sweat out of my eyes. Neff looked at me then. Even with his sunglasses covering most of his face, I could tell he looked disappointed in me.
Moore, you're so handsome, but so dumb at the same time.
Neff reached out and took my face with both hands, as if keeping my head still would make his point sink in deeper. I pulled my face away, annoyed. We had a body right in front of us. Why wouldn't we contact the local police department to come and find her? What's your plan? Raise her from the dead and walk her over to the cops? I asked, letting my annoyance seep into my voice.
No, that would be even stupider. Listen, how are you going to get the cops to come over here? Call and say there's a body under this tree? Do you really think they would drop everything to come out here? And let's just say they do listen. They're going to find the person who called in the tip,
Neff explained. Yes, all of this was true. But we'd come this far. What were we going to do? We needed to somehow make police aware of this poor girl. All right, what's your plan then? I asked, wanting to know if Neff had a way to solve our problem. A bright light suddenly blinded me when I looked back at him. When he didn't answer for a moment, I looked at the unmarked grave decorated with flowers. When my head turned back, a flash and a click of a camera made me stumble back. When my eyesight returned, Neff was holding a Polaroid camera in his hand. He was shaking the photo he had just taken of my startled face. His duffel bag was hanging from his shoulder, so he must have gotten the camera from there.
We uncover her, take a photo, and send it to the cops along with the location written on the back of the photo as proof,
he told me, hiding the photo he'd taken of me before I snatched it away. Fingerprints? I asked him, following his line of thought.
I don't have any. This film was purchased before you were born, and the records were lost in the fire. They're not going to track down where it came from.
Handwriting, then. They can figure things out based on that. I was a detective, but I will admit a very green one. I hadn't been on many cases aside from some simple robberies and drug busts. Only assisted in one murder before. I hate to admit it, but Neff knew more about my line of work than I did. He silently took a notebook out of his bag with a ballpoint pen. After a few minutes, he lifted the book up to let me see what he was writing. In block letters that looked as if they were typed on a computer, was, "I like your butt." I punched his shoulder. He'd proved his point. If I didn't watch him write it, I would have assumed it came from a printer. With all that settled, the only thing left was to dig. The zombie that was following behind us was holding a shovel. I hadn't looked in his direction until that point. The necromancer thought of this plan way more than I did. I was certain this wasn't Neff's first time tracking down bodies. Taking the shovel, I went over to the marked tree. I tried to avoid digging up as few flowers as possible. I was sure to be slow and careful. There was no way telling how far down she was buried. The last thing I wanted to do was damage her body. The entire thing felt wrong. It was wrong. I was digging up a dead body. A poor victim that had loved ones waiting for her. I wasn't doing it in the proper way. I feared my meddling may ruin chances of the officers gathering evidence of who killed her. Then again, if we didn't do this, she may never be found. The day wore on as I dug slowly. I was drenched in sweat and needed to accept a bottle of water from the zombie. Neff was under a tree napping. With his sunglasses on, it appeared he was sleeping. Necromancers never dug their own graves, after all. After hours of work, I was in mid-swing of the shovel when I heard his voice. "Stop!" I froze, looking up to see Neff looking down at me. He reached over, taking the back of my shirt, and lifted me out of the small hole and onto the grass. I'd forgotten how strong this beanpole was. He carefully got into the grave I had dug and crouched down and started to brush the dirt away. My breath caught when he took hold of some brown fabric the same color as the dirt and pulled it away, showing a dirty skull. We found her. I suddenly got faint. It was either from the heat or from being in front of a dead, innocent victim. I swayed on my feet and felt a set of hands guide me to sit down. I really expected Neff to take my moment of weakness to cop a feel. He behaved, letting me collect myself. I took small sips of water, listening to the wind through the trees and birds chirping away. I needed to focus on anything, except what we uncovered. A snap of the camera brought me back. I finally looked down into the shallow grave at the exposed skull. Fallen strands of hair surrounded it. After getting a photo, Neff covered the skull again with the fabric, but we both knew we would not fill the grave back in. I couldn't handle the thought of her being buried in this place a second time. How are we going to send the photo?" I asked in a hoarse voice. My strength was gone from the day and our discovery. I was thankful I had someone to help me deal with this, even if it was a person like Neff. As if answering my question, he whistled. A short whistle, like he was calling a dog. For a few seconds, I only heard the normal sounds of the forest around us. The cackling of crows sounded normal, until a large burst of wind and sounds of wing came into our clearing. With a great deafening cawing, a crow larger than most dogs landed on Neff's outstretched arm.
"This is Kara. She's a good girl. Normally, humans can't even see her, let alone interact with her. She can go into the police station and place the photo on the lead detective's desk. Simple as that. No traces to connect it to us,"
Neff explained. He pulled some jerky from his bag and gave it to the large bird, who greedily devoured it. He then held out the photo, and she so carefully took it in her beak. He gave her a kiss on her head, and the large creature was off to finish her task. I looked up to see more oversized crows sitting in trees, looking down at us. "Are they, like, familiars or something?" I asked, looking at the three others staring down at us.
"What? I'm not a witch. They're just crows I raised. That's Kara, Karen, Kaylin, and Carl,"
he said, pointing at each crow one at a time. "Is that Carl with a K?" I asked. Neff smiled at me.
"Actually, it is."
I don't know if it was because of the heat, the digging, or the shock of finding a forgotten victim, or a mixture of all of those things, but I laughed. A small snort of a giggle, but I still laughed at such a stupid little thing. I really hated to admit it, but I think in that moment, when we both laughed at the same thing, we became friends. Or at least, more friendly than before. By the time we got back to the car, I was filthy. I bet I smelled almost as bad as the zombie we had following us around. My car was never going to recover from this trip. Neff suggested we rent a cheap room for a few hours. He hinted it could be for other things, but I really just needed to clean up. I refused his advances, but agreed on getting a room so I could shower. We had found one girl out of an unknown number of them. Mary. The one who started me down this rabbit hole was still out there somewhere. Even if I had to quit my job, I swore I would find her. We only stayed at the small rundown motel for a few hours. Neff paid, and I wondered how he had any money. I doubted necromancy was a well-paying job, when he did gigs like this for dinner dates. Fearing his answer, I didn't ask. I just got cleaned up, a little rested, and ready to get going. While I took a nap, Neff went out with my car. He informed me he saw some fresh roadkill he needed to collect. As long as he didn't put it in the back seat of my car, I didn't care too much. The trunk was already a lost cause, smelling like death. Before the sun began to rise, we left, hot on the trail of a second victim. My hopes were high that day. Hiking through the woods, we found the grave in front of a fallen log a few hours after sunrise. It was already getting hot, and I'd gotten a few bug bites from my trouble. But still, I kept at it and started to dig. The digging didn't last very long. I was only a few feet down when Neff stopped me. I moved away, letting him get down on his knees to sift through the dirt with his long, thin fingers. Finally, he brought up a piece of bone I assumed to be a rib. My heart dropped. Again, I was not thinking ahead. I didn't know what we would do if the body was in pieces. This was the forest, after all. Any sort of animal could have gotten to her before us. Plus, she'd been buried for over 20 years. It was a miracle we found the first body in such good condition. Neff kept looking through the dirt. He found a few more pieces of bone, only enough to fit in one hand. Not enough for us to identify who she was, though. Can our zombie friend help us find the rest of her? I asked, sitting on the rotting log. I was watching Neff as he stood up with a small amount of bone fragments in his hand.
No, it can only bring us to where he buried her.
What about you? Can you, sense death or dead bodies? Something like that? I asked, hopeful. It seemed like Neff could sense whenever I was just about to uncover some bones. So maybe he knew a spell or something that could track whatever remained of her.
I can, but I can't find her. She's been scattered throughout the woods and eaten by animals. Such small pieces are hard enough to sense without the other traces of death being around. A dead deer would be a bigger source of death, and would overpower her bones if they were close by. I'm afraid this is all we're going to find of her, he explained, using a rare, serious tone. But, I said, standing up, desperate to try and think of anything else. I couldn't accept we were so close and yet not able to give closure to her loved ones. Isn't there anything we can use, like magic or supernatural tracking dogs? I pleaded. He shook his head, then looked over at me as an idea came over him. Dogs? Well, actually, if they're in the area, I think this could work. I'm not promising anything, though. If I call in a favor, I could give us a better chance of finding more pieces of this girl. Again, no promises. I'm not saying we'll find enough DNA or something like that, but it's also worth a shot. Also, it's gonna cost you.
I was hot and tired and didn't feel like dealing with him. Whatever the cost was, it would be worth finding out who those bone fragments belonged to.
You need to put out on the first date,
Neff said quickly. Absolutely not, I shot back with no hesitation.
Fine, a goodnight kiss.
Not on your life.
Let me put my hand on your thigh during the movie.
I will hold your hand while walking into the theater, but we are still watching the movie with a seat between us.
Deal.
If we didn't end this trip soon, I was either going to kill him or myself. Getting out of the woods was a bit hard, with some families deciding to take a hike. They smelled our zombie trailing behind us. I feared someone would go off the trail looking for the source. Neff guided us out of the woods, off the trail, and away from the people. We ended up a bit of a walk away from where we parked. By the end of the day, I was again covered in dirt, sweat, and bug bites. I wasn't the type for off-trail hikes, and was completely exhausted by the end of the day. Neff had to stay in the area and try to track down the person he thought would help us find the bone fragments. He didn't tell me much about them, and I didn't ask. He dropped me off at a motel, one that looked even worse than the last. Still, I got cleaned up and ate some fast food we picked up along the way. I was so tired, I fell asleep on top of the blankets on a stiff motel bed. I had my cell phone on the bedside table in case Neff needed me for something. The curtains were cheap and nearly transparent. The red light of the neon motel sign poured through into my room. In the dead of night and after a few hours of falling asleep, I thought I heard Neff's voice outside my room. I opened my eyes, still drowsy and head-heavy. I thought I heard him greet someone outside. Figuring it would be best to go and see what was going on, I sat up to start moving when a shadow came across the window, blocking out the light. Something was just outside my room. A massive frame took up almost the entire window. It looked human enough as it walked past, but I saw something trailing behind. Something that looked a lot like a tail. What the hell kind of monster did Neff know? Or was this something Neff was friendly with? Was it after us? Did it smell the zombie and thought it was a meal? It was dumb, but in my half-asleep state, I was worried about the necromancer outside. I was only human and didn't even bring my gun along. I would be useless. Still, my body moved as I ran to the door, bursting out, looking over, trying to see the monster just outside my room. I heard Neff saying my name, sounding confused. And I remember seeing a simple eye symbol. Then I was flat on my back, the world spinning, my body feeling like 1,000 pounds as I blacked out. I had no idea how much time passed until I felt myself being lifted into a sitting position, and something cool being placed upon my forehead. My senses slowly returned to me as my hand reached up to touch a cold can of soda pressed against my brow. I heard Neff talking, but not what he was saying. I shook my head, trying to get my head clear. What just... I asked, feeling well enough to open my eyes to see I was still out in front of my motel room.
I was calling you handsome and stupid again. Seeing a wolf that does not want to be seen is dangerous, he explained.
A wolf? I asked slowly as another memory came back. Yes, I had seen a wolf face. A snout poking out from fabric over its face with the eye symbol painted upon it. But it was tall. Very tall. And human-shaped. I shook my head again, not wanting to believe I might have seen something that looked a hell of a lot like a werewolf.
Valak is a nomad spellcaster. He's the one I asked over to deal with our scattered bone problem. Like Kara, humans can't see him or interact with him unless he wants it. Come on, you need to stand up. You just got slammed by a spell. He panicked and knocked you out. If you don't want to walk it off, you'll go into a coma for months.
Neff helped me stand on shaking legs. My entire body protested against it. Everything started to spin, but the idea of giving into the urge of sleep and not waking for months kept me going. Neff sounded like a decent person for once. He let me rest my head against his shoulder. I was in such a bad state he could slip a hand anywhere and I would not notice. I suspected he did just that as he grabbed me around the waist, making me take one step forward. That almost made me puke. If I could focus on anything but getting sick, I would be embarrassed over him being so close and having his hands all over me. So, can he help? I asked, hoping talking would keep me focused.
In a way. Because of what he is, Valak can cast spells and make charms in a way that costs less energy and sacrifices. I could cast the spell to find some more bones, but it's cheaper to ask him. Anyways, how to explain the spell? Are you gonna puke? Because if you are, just get it over with.
We made some progress walking. I tried to pull away from him to take a few steps on my own, but the movement nearly made me sick again. I just had to accept another man clinging onto me until my head cleared up. I'm fine, go on, I lied.
Alright, now where was I? Right, the spell. It's a formatted love spell. Instead of an increased chance of finding your true love, we scrapped it and turned it into an increased chance of finding bone fragments in the woods. We decided to cast it on the sheriff of this area. Then Valak is going to cause havoc in the woods. The sheriff shows up, finds some bone fragments. It's out of our hands from there. The spell only increases the odds of finding fragments by so much, and we can't cast the same spell twice. Even with magic, there's only so much you can do.
By the time we reached the office, I was feeling much better, and could support myself again. I pulled away from Neff, but didn't trust walking on my own just yet. I felt like I had the world's worst hangover, and got hit by a truck all at the same time. Still, I had enough sense to realize Neff was doing a lot for me. He'd used his connections and went well out of his way to find parts of a woman he didn't care about. And for what? Hanging out with someone who really didn't want him around? How was this all worth it for him? Thank you for what you're doing, I said, pressing the cool can of soda against my forehead, again hoping it would help.
A kiss would be a better thanks,
he said, crossing his arms. Yeah, sure, whatever. I felt so sick in that moment I really didn't care. I doubted I would even remember half of that night, if I ever recovered from what Valak hit me with. Neff's face lit up, taking me completely seriously. I felt both of his hands grab my shoulders. The dumbass actually was trying to take advantage of me. I almost felt bad for him, because the movement of him suddenly grabbing me shook my head so badly I lost my dinner all over the front of his shirt. Neither of us spoke, as he helped me get back to my room while covered in my dinner. I think he helped me get cleaned up a little, but my memory is hazy at best after puking all over him. I woke up the next day wearing a new shirt, but the same jeans as the night before. I still felt like utter garbage, but could manage getting out of bed. When I saw Neff at the car, he didn't speak to me. He just got in the driver's side, ready to get moving to find the next body. I was perfectly alright with the silent treatment. And I never wanted to talk about what happened the night before. On a road trip finding murder victims, only stopping for a few hours at awful hotels and eating greasy fast food, is not my idea of a vacation. In order to take the time off from my job, I faked a family emergency, and then dipped into my vacation time. My boss called to check up on me, asking if everything was alright, and if I was enjoying some time off. I wasn't officially on the case, and couldn't tell him I was driving around with an honest-to-God necromancer. Telling my boss some lies to get him off the phone, I met back up with Neff. He was shoving a mountain of burgers into his face. I could barely stomach greasy fries at that moment, let alone a full meal. He must have a stomach of steel. We found the next gravesite, but ran into a problem. It was along a very popular hiking and camping area. The woods had a steady stream of people along the entrances. Neff vaguely knew where the buried bodies were, but needed the zombie to guide him to the right spot. But the zombie was, well, a walking dead body. He looked in rough shape and smelled horrible from spending days in a hot car trunk. We couldn't risk anyone seeing it, let alone smelling it. We had to come back to the woods at night. Once we found the gravesite, we could stash the zombie in the trunk and away from any unsuspecting campers from stumbling on our undead guide. We followed the plan and found the site in the dark. It looked like just a normal clearing in the woods, apart from a large X spray-painted on a rock. I shuddered when my flashlight beam shone on it. I knew there was a body buried there. Even after getting tangled up with a necromancer, seeing a zombie walk around and uncovering some bones, I still got a chill thinking about a dead body waiting to be found. My stomach was tied up in knots, and it was not from my terrible diet for the past few days. Neff left me in the clearing alone to guard the site as he took the zombie back to the car. It was an hour or so until sunrise. We needed to find the site at night, but Neff didn't want to dig yet in case I didn't see what I was doing and damage the body with my shovel. This was not the proper process, but we should really just do our best to limit the damage to the crime scene. I waited in the dark woods, skin crawling, listening to the sounds around me. Even normal forest noises could be threatening when you were alone in the dark near a grave. I just wanted the sun to come up and us to finish our task and get the hell out of there. I heard a sound of twigs snapping and it made me jump. I shone my flashlight over, trying to see if Neff was the one making the sounds. I was positive I wasn't being paranoid. I was hearing someone walking around in the trees. Mentally, I chided myself. We were in an area with people camping. Someone might have left their tent for a washroom run, and I could be scaring them just as much as they were scaring me. My hands started to sweat as I kept moving the flashlight around, trying to see who was walking just beyond the trees. Soon, the footsteps stopped. My heart was beating so loud I thought it would burst. I sensed something behind me. It was hard to explain. I didn't hear anything. I just knew something was now at my back. Turning on my heel so fast I nearly twisted it, I looked at the large rock behind me. Now, sitting on top, above the large painted X, was something that nearly made me turn and run. A small object looking like a stickman, made of what I assumed to be small bones. Tied to a star, also made of bones. I'd seen the Blair Witch, and I knew stickman charms were bad news. Taking one step back without taking my eyes off the thing, I started to go towards the edge of the clearing. Strong hands grabbed my shoulders from behind. I screamed, very similar to a frightened little girl, and dropped my flashlight as I swung around trying to get free of those hands. A loud, cackling laugh frightened me more until I recognized it. Neff was behind me, doubled over laughing so hard, sounding like he was choking. I felt my face turn red in the dark. Unable to control my rage, I started to kick at his shins, expressing how I felt about him sneaking up behind me and grabbing me. He dodged, only to trip over his own feet, fall to the ground, still cackling. He could choke to death on his own laughter for all I cared. "You're a complete ass," I hissed at him. I walked over to the rock, grabbed the stick man, and tossed it at him. "Shit like this isn't funny," I fumed. It took him a while, but he finally recovered enough to sit up with the charm in his hand. He rubbed at his eyes, looking at the stick man.
"Valak was here. He told me he finished our request and wanted to leave you a gift as an apology for nearly killing you. He's really shy, so when you almost saw him, he panicked."
Shy? That massive, terrifying wolf creature was shy? I took back the charm, looking it over. It may be a gift, but it still gave me the creeps. "What is it for?" I asked, looking at the creepy thing.
"It's a good luck charm. It absorbs all your bad luck. After a few days, you should burn it, and it'll burn away the bad luck it took in. If you wait too long, the charm might take in too much and it'll break, spilling all that bad luck back onto you,"
Neff explained. I turned it over in my hand, wondering what made Valak think I needed such a thing. I couldn't help but feel I was already lucky. I stumbled into someone who could close a few cold cases and was willing to do so. I tucked the charm away, reminding myself to burn it tomorrow night. "Neff, why are you still here? You've invested so much time and energy in this. Finding these girls is my job. But for you..." We still had time until sunrise and until we could start digging. I couldn't help but ask a question that had been bothering me for a while.
"You're my type."
No, seriously. He looked at me in the dim flashlight beam. He had his sunglasses off, and I could see his red eyes looking off into the distance, trying to decide on something. He finally looked back at me with an expression on his face I couldn't place.
"You showed up at a good time. I have nothing going on right now. The gate is closed. The deep creatures are peacefully asleep, and I'm not needed to keep the world balanced. I used up a lot of my strength recently, and I'm pretty weak right now. I should be resting, considering how easy it would be to kill me, but I guess I'm just tired of dealing in end-of-the-world stuff. Doing a simple job with some nice eye candy isn't so bad once in a while."
I would let the eye candy comment go, because I could tell he was finally being honest with me. I also knew if I pressed him, asking him about any of the things he'd mentioned, I would not get an answer. Anything called the deep creatures is well beyond my pay grade. The end-of-the-world stuff was not for me. As the hour passed by, I tried asking him some other questions, attempting to get any more facts about himself. I was shot down and realized Neff was done being honest and sharing. He was a bit of a mystery, and wanted to stay like that. When the sun rose, I stopped talking and went about the somber task of digging yet another grave. This one deeper than the others. I'd gotten a bit skilled at digging the past few days. Even though it was deeper, it didn't take me as long as I thought. It barely started to warm up when Neff stopped me, and did the process of looking into the dirt to find another skull looking back at us. He took the photo and called his large crow Carl this time. But he did not send Carl away. Instead, he looked over at me.
"This is Mary, the girl from the case. I want you to delay sending the photo to the local police until we're done finding graves. I have a feeling we only have one more after this one. Her killer buried her wallet with her. With that found, you'll be called in, and you won't be free to find the last site,"
Neff explained, his large bird perched on his arm, flapping its wings to adjust itself. I nodded while looking over at where I just dug. I didn't want to leave her. It made me feel sick knowing she was going to be still in the ground and not brought home for a little while longer. But for the sake of another girl somewhere, I needed to leave Mary alone. Just then, I was starting to think I wasn't cut out for my job. I could handle being a detective in a small town where nothing happened. If I worked in a larger town and this was my day-to-day life, seeing bodies, I just couldn't do it. Neff told Carl to deliver the photo later, and he guided me back to the car. I was ready to sit down, get washed up, and find the last site. I just wanted this to be over. When Neff got to the car, he didn't get inside. Instead, he leaned against it, looking over at the early birds arriving on the hiking trail.
I've held back some important information. With these sites being discovered, you'll hear the news soon. I didn't want you to be extra stressed. You needed to be able to deal with what we were doing. And no offense, you're a cute little country boy playing detective. I like that about you. So small and pure, acting like a tough grown man.
I punched his arm. It was a reflex at that point. Lay it on me. If I can handle being around you, I can handle whatever you're going to tell me.
The first gravesite you dug up, there wasn't one body. There was 4,
Neff said in a low tone. My entire body prickled and felt cold. Tears suddenly started to sting my eyes, but I blinked them back. 4 bodies? 4 girls buried away for that long? Neff was right. I felt sick and didn't want to think about it.
The site with the fragments was only the one girl. It was a rush job, and that's why she was buried so poorly and the animal got to her. This site has 6 bodies. Mary was not alone all these years.
I don't know how Neff could give me news so coldly. He was talking about double-digit murder victims, but it sounded like he was telling me the weather. I turned away from him, my stomach empty, but still felt like I was going to be sick. I hunched over, head down, hands on my knees, trying to understand what he just said. 11 girls? So many loved ones hurt and waiting. All because of one evil man. And he was evil. I knew that for certain in that moment. I looked over in the direction of the trunk and where we stored the walking corpse. I've never hated anything or anyone in my entire life until then. I hated that man for taking so many lives, for hurting so many people. I was glad he died, and everything he was died along with him. Someday he would be forgotten, his name never to be repeated. I swore then that if I could help it, I would never use his name, to try and speed up the process of having time erase him from the world. When I felt better, I straightened up and looked behind me to see Neff with his arms open. He wiggled his fingers, beckoning me to go to him for an embrace. I ignored him and got into the car. One more site to go. Neff was right. It was harder going towards the grave when you knew there were a few bodies waiting, instead of just one. I refused to stay at a motel, and wanted us to stay on the road and keep going. Neff would just have to deal with me being dirty for another day or so. Aside from bathroom breaks, we didn't stop. We drove into farm country. Corn and cow fields flew by. My cell phone didn't have signal, and the radio was more static than music. We truly were in the middle of nowhere. The perfect place for forgotten bodies. Because there were so few people, we could take our zombie guide out without any worry. I now had another reason to feel sick when I looked at him. The car got stuck a few times along a dirty and bumpy road, until Neff finally parked and made us all get out. One last trip and one last sight. Neff could sense how I was feeling and wisely didn't attempt flirting. In fact, he was acting a bit different the past day. He gave me the silent treatment before, after I puked on his shirt, but this was colder. He seemed tense. There was a chance the idea of finding so many victims was getting to him as well. He was carrying the shovel, and I followed behind him. We found ourselves in an overgrown field. At some point in the past, the field looked to be part of some farmland, before the owner had just given up on it. I reached for the shovel to start digging, but Neff walked out of my reach. He paced around, finding a spot, and to my shock, he started to dig. He'd refused so many times, it was a waste of breath to ask. And yet, there he was, completely focused on his task. The hot sun not bothering him as he shoveled away dirt in such a perfect pace. Give him a day and he might dig halfway to the Earth's core. I let him work, not speaking to him, feeling as if this was something he needed to do. It didn't take long, but he uncovered a grave. A small bundle of fabric that made my throat close. It was so small. I feared he cut the victim up before burying her. Brushing away dirt, he revealed another small fabric bundle beside the first one, but he did not uncover them. Neff just looked down with a strange expression on his face. He looked almost sad at what he was seeing. I wanted to get his attention, to make him look away from the sight, but no words came to mind. There was really nothing I could say in the moment. Still, I opened my mouth to say his name when a loud crack rang through the air. I jumped at the sound as more rang off. I knew those were gunshots. Some sort of hunting rifle sounding close by. I grew up where hunting was common, so I knew the sound. I looked behind me, trying to see where the first shot came from, then forced my eyes back at Neff, telling him to get out from the open. My heart stopped when I saw it was far too late. His sunglasses exploded from his face as the second shot came. I was in such a state of shock seeing my friend collapse to the ground, I didn't even register I was in danger as well. When my body did move, it was to make the stupid choice of running to him. I should have left him and ran for cover. I should have grabbed a shovel for some sort of weapon. I should have done anything but run over to Neff and haul him into my arms to see his damaged face spilling blood over my clothing. I just couldn't accept he was hurt. My mind just snapped, thinking if I could get him out of there, everything would be fine. It was Neff, after all. He could raise the dead. It was impossible that a bullet or two to the face could kill him. Hooking my arms under his, I tried dragging him away. Fast footsteps came running up behind me, and I was far too late to move out of the way as someone hit my head hard from behind. Hard enough to knock me out. I woke up, head pounding and feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Everything hurt and felt too heavy to move. I've never had such a pain before. For a few minutes, the pain was so much I'd forgotten about everything. Soon, the horrible memories came rushing back. I jerked my head up to look around, shouting Neff's name, trying to find him. My arms and legs were taped tightly to a chair. I struggled to get free while darting my heavy head around, taking in my surroundings. It looked like a rundown old wooden cabin. Signs of someone living there were scattered around. It smelled musty and old. In the dim light, my eyes landed on two figures on the floor. One was the zombie, now not moving and looking just as dead as when we first dug him up. The other was my friend, dried blood over his face, his one eye completely destroyed while the other stared over at me, yet not seeing anything. "Neff, no!" My voice cracked as I yelled for him. I couldn't control myself or even think. I didn't care if the person who did all this could hear me. I just needed to get the hell out of that chair and to my friend. While I struggled, I wasn't paying attention as a man entered the small room. He was dirty and looked homeless. Rifle over one shoulder, he came to me, swinging the butt of the gun into my face, scrambling my brain for a few seconds.
"Who the hell are you?"
he yelled, sounding as stressed as I felt.
"And how did you find the bodies?"
My head was swimming. Nothing made sense. Who the hell was this guy? Why did he shoot at us? And why wasn't Neff just getting up and taking care of this? He wasn't human. A bullet or two to the face shouldn't kill him. I had to push the thought of my friend from my mind for at least a few minutes to figure out who this man was. He paced around looking strung out and on something. He was muttering to himself while looking over in my direction. Suddenly, the thought snapped in my mind. "Your dead partner told us," I replied, voice sounding hoarse. He froze, eyes wide in fear, and looked at the dead man we'd brought along, then back at me. For my answer, he punched my face again and started to shake the chair.
"The dead don't talk! Who the hell are you?"
he screamed, his rancid breath nearly making me sick. "It's the truth. The man you shot is a necromancer. He'll be getting back up any second now to set you straight." I hoped I sounded confident, or at least somewhat threatening. The man stopped shaking me. He stared at me, trying to see if I was lying or not. Slowly, he let go and started towards Neff's body. To my horror, he took his rifle off his shoulder and shot Neff a few more times for good measure. I shouted and screamed at him to stop. I strained against the chair, but it and my bonds stayed.
"There. Now I'll ask you again before I kill you too. How did you find the bodies? I never told anyone. And he never told anyone about me. How did you know?
Tears came to my eyes. I wanted to force them down and handle this. I was a grown man, for God's sake. I should be able to handle this. At least I now knew who this man was. At some point, him and the other killer joined up. It wasn't unheard of. And for some reason, when one of them was caught, neither ratted the other out. The one man died in prison while the other was left to be free and kept killing. I didn't understand how Neff didn't know about this man. Did he know and think the partner was dead already? Or moved on and wasn't a threat? He hinted before that he could see how the women were murdered. If he had access to those kinds of memories, surely he would have seen there was a second person. I told you already, he's a necromancer. I was in a poor state. Any kind of fight left me, and I knew I was going to die. I couldn't get free, and my friend was dead. This man just needed to shoot me once, and it was all over. Instead, he hit me again, this time breaking my nose. Blood poured down my face, but I refused to cry out in pain.
That's it. I'll bury you with those little girls you tried so hard to find. And get the hell out of here.
He sounded strangely calm as he leveled the rifle right in front of my face. At this distance, there was no question of him missing. I was a second away from death before a tremor hit the house. Everything shook and rattled while a thundering sound came from outside. It made him drop his rifle in fear and look around. I've never been through an earthquake and was very confused on what was happening. As the shaking stopped, he went to pick up his weapon. Before his hand could reach it, his entire body was kicked away and well across the room, slamming hard against a wall. To my immense relief, Neff stood in front of me, his face now healed. I didn't question how he was alive or what even happened. I was just glad he was alive and standing. He wasted no time tearing the tape away and getting me out of the chair. Christ, Neff, do you have any idea how worried I was about you? I snapped at him. I expected him to give me a flirty answer back, or, well, even look at me. Instead, he kept his eyes cold, and on his task of freeing me. When I was standing, he took my chin roughly to look over the damage.
Here, let me take care of this.
He didn't even sound like himself. Did the bullet do some damage to his head after all? I let out a yell of surprise when he ripped my shirt open with one hand, keeping my head in place by holding my chin. I used all of my strength trying to pry his hand off, but his grip was like a vice. He covered his palm with the blood from my nose and slammed it against my bare chest. It felt like a shockwave, as if something traveled through my body, taking all the air from my lungs. When he let go, I coughed, trying to refill them and recover. I found, aside from trying to breathe, all the other pains went away. My nose felt fine, and my head no longer pounded with pain. Roughly, he grabbed my arm and started to drag me out of the room. Neff, what the hell? I demanded, to get no answer. I planted my feet down, but it didn't do anything. Wait, we need to get this guy tied up or something. He killed those girls, along with that other... Neff, come on, let's go back and deal with this. He kept dragging me along, not looking at me. It scared me. Deep down, I felt like if I didn't get him talking, something awful was going to happen. I was dragged along out of a rundown cabin to a grassy field, still trying to dig my feet in. He finally stopped a few feet out of the cabin. He let go of my arm, but did not turn to face me.
You are going to leave. Go back to your life. We never met. You have nothing to do with this. I'll deal with him in my own way.
Neff answered, his tone chilling my blood even while in the hot sun. Deep down, I knew what he meant by his own way. Neff wasn't human. That man wasn't just going to be killed. Neff could torture him in ways my mind couldn't even imagine. And for what that bastard had done, I almost wanted to let him go through with it. But I hated how Neff was acting. This wasn't him. If he went down this road, he would lose a part of himself. I knew that much. We're taking him in so he can be judged for his crimes. I may not be a good detective, but I'm still a man of the law. I can't let you kill him, I said, sternly standing my ground. Neff looked over his shoulder at me. When his intimidating look didn't faze me, he finally turned to look down on me.
That last grave was for children.
My hands shook and bile came to my throat. Those small fabric bundles weren't because the bodies were cut apart. I understood now why Neff was so deeply angry. He saw what those two did and how many were in that grave. If anyone deserved to be tortured, that man did. But Neff didn't deserve to be the one carrying it out. I still have to follow the law. He needs to be in court for... Suddenly, Neff snapped, his red eyes blazing. He felt taller, and the sun around us dimmed. His teeth became sharper, and his hands curled, looking like claws.
I am not human. I have seen his crimes, and I have judged him guilty. This man needs to be erased from history in the most painful way possible.
He didn't even sound human anymore. The person I considered to be a friend was becoming something else. Dark and threatening, he growled down at me, and I felt so small in that moment. Still, I needed to get through to him. It's not your place. You can't take this away from the families of... Again, I was cut off. His face twisted into something, and the ground started to rumble under my feet. His face grew so dark in the sudden lack of light around us, I could only see his red eyes and snarling mouth.
Why should they get a sense of closure when I never did? If I could not rip apart the man that violated my little one, I shall tear apart any vile piece of shit I come across. That is what I am owed. I do not care if I'm taking that away from anyone else. These men are going to get what they deserve, and I shall not stop until...
The world was dark and shaking from his rage. I knew if he kept going, he would turn into something else. Dark shapes, looking almost like wings, started to appear behind him. Neff was powerful, angry, and yet deeply scarred. I pushed aside my fear of him. I reached out and pulled him close to me. The world and Neff returned to normal. The sun shone down again as I let him hide his face in my shoulder. If you keep going like this, you won't be able to come back from it, I told him, my hands shaking, but I still kept them on his back.
You're gonna have to go on that date with me if we keep that guy alive and have him arrested.
His voice was muffled, and he was trying to go back to his normal flirting tone, but he just sounded weak. I'll go the whole 9 yards for you if it'll keep you from doing anything stupid. We both let out a weak laugh at my offer. Raising his head, he looked down at me. I really thought I'd gotten through to him, and we were just gonna peacefully drag the murderer in the cabin to the local cops. A gunshot came from behind us. Neff pushed me aside, and I tripped into the grass. The man was at the cabin door trying to reload his rifle, but his fingers were fumbling. I got up to grab Neff and get the hell out of there when I slammed into an invisible wall separating us. The man finally got his weapon loaded and fired again. The bullet exploded against the same wall I was banging my fist against trying to get to my friend. Neff knew this wall was here the entire time. I don't know how or when he created it. No matter how hard I pushed, I couldn't get through. Neff turned to look at me with a hint of regret on his face. He'd already made his decision. Staying meant becoming a monster. And Neff was staying. I could no longer talk him out of it. But I think he was glad that there was someone who cared enough about him to try. Turning away from me, his body twisted and turned dark. He moved too fast for me to get a good look at what he became. Whatever he truly looked like, it was dark and sleek, and something no human eye should ever look upon. The black shape blurred across the grass, right towards the dirty man and his rifle. I heard screams as the shape dragged him inside the cabin, and couldn't do a damn thing about it. I really should have left. After a few hours of trying to get past that invisible wall, I turned away to find the car. The sun set when I did find it. Being so exhausted, I just collapsed in the back seat. Neff left behind his mixed CD, The music stayed on for a little while because it grew on me during the trip. When morning came, I found somewhere to get cleaned up, then drove back to that cabin. I parked the car down the road and waited, then repeated the process for the next 3 days. My boss may be trying to get in contact with me, but I didn't care. The very least I could do was take a friend home. Near sunset on the third day, Neff came out of the cabin. I could see him in the dimming light where I parked. Getting out of the car, I waited for him to take the long walk down towards me. His clothing was torn and covered in dried blood that he looked as if he'd tried to clean. His hair was no longer tied back and his sunglasses were lost. He'd lost so much weight in those few days. Weight he could not afford to lose. When he stopped a few steps away, he didn't even look up at me. Along with some pounds, he'd lost something else in those 3 days. Something he could never get back. Holding out a bottle of water for him, he took it in weak hands. We didn't leave, I just leaned against the car with him looking at the colors of the sky changing. There were so many questions I wanted to ask. Not a single one felt right to say.
I lost my daughter,
he said finally, after taking a few sips from his water. Adopted? I asked carefully.
What do you think?
At least he still had some humor left.
The men who did things to her died in an accident before I got to them. They didn't even feel any pain. They just died. How unfair is that? I was a human a long time ago. I became what I am because of that.
To bring her back?
No. Even then I knew she was never coming back. No matter how much you love someone, death is the end. They don't come back. You can bring back parts of them. Hints of what was. But never that person. I couldn't bear seeing parts of her. It's like you find an object that belonged to your deceased loved one and it just reminds you all over again that they're gone. No, not her. I wanted to bring back parts of the ones who harmed her and make them suffer. I thought if even traces of the ones responsible for her death felt my wrath, I would feel something. Instead, I became this. As simple as that.
Again, I was at a loss for words. Nothing I could say would help him at this point. No matter how much I wanted to. Come on, I'll take you home. At least that small gesture was enough for Neff. He gave me a hint of a smile and got inside the backseat of the car to curl up and sleep for the trip home. We didn't talk much on the way back, just took turns driving when needed. It was a depressing trip back, to say the least. I knew a case would be ready to be closed when I got back. So many bodies were being found. They finally noticed the grave of the serial killer was robbed, so when I got back, I needed to do my best to avert suspicion, away from myself for that crime. I would have my hands full. Not at all what I thought I would have to deal with, taking over the lead detective role in a sleepy, small town. I dropped by Neff's place first. I didn't even check my phone. I knew it was full of messages telling me to get the hell back already. Neff got out and stretched. Neither of us knew how to say goodbye or what to say to each other after everything. Are you free next Friday? I asked him finally.
I might be. Why do you ask?
He said with some of his old playful manner coming back. Let's go out. Dinner and a movie. Let's say 5. A fancy steak place and some rom-com or whatever. If you play your cards right, I might even put out on the first date. The last part was a lie, and we both knew it. But at least it got him to finally smile. I drove off, leaving him to his chickens, and with a promise to see each other again. I was right to assume I was going to be busy. Friday came, and Neff called my office. He knew I had too much on my plate, and we put off the date until things died down a little. A few months passed, and I finally cleared a day. We called each other from time to time. But when I couldn't get in contact with him for a week, panic started to rise. I drove down to his place to check it out. His rusted, beat-up car remained in the driveway, but it was far too quiet at his place. I ran to the backyard to find it empty of chickens. Their coops still stood, clean as if never used before. Not even knocking, I opened his unlocked door to start looking through the old farmhouse, and found nothing. Just a dusty, empty house with sparse furniture. It appeared as if no one had lived there for years. Maybe Neff never stayed there. Maybe he just dropped by and used the backyard for his failed chicken army. I kept looking for him. Months turned into years. Access to information got better, but I still couldn't find traces of my friend. No matter how hard I looked, I knew if he didn't want to be found, I wouldn't come across him. But still, in the back of my mind, I felt like we would meet again. I owed him a date, after all. I was positive that someday he would come by to collect on it. Thanks everybody for watching today's video. Today's story was written by Reddit user 02321, who's one of my favorite authors on there. He's also let me use a couple other stories of his for the channel, and is a very kind, very generous author, very talented as well. I hope you'll all take a look at the description below and check out his work. Please give him some love in the comments, and thanks again to 02321 for letting me use this story. He's written a couple other of my favorite stories on the channel, which I'll link at the end of the video at the bottom right-hand corner, including the Rookie Deputy story, Rookie Deputy on a Long Dark Highway, so I hope you'll all check that out as well. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Sewall, Cheryl James, Pick Your Sticker, Teddy Dog, Glue 404, Mama Cotto, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan, Blarian 50, Devin Kyle, Timothy Baird, Ajeti, Bert Turner, Bajani Aspinall, Michael Pierce, Big Joe, Carrie Harkonnen, LaDonna Spivey, Scott Tanaka, Tom Stewart, Sherman Davis, Bryce Shelton, Susan McClendon, Elise Batiste, Lisa and the Cult Jam, Open Circuit, Fabulavore, Raymond Jaggers, That Darn Fox, Raison Detra, Kai Gaming 99, Wendy Burns, The Wendigo, Michael Squishy Park, The Gemstar, Vault 77 Citizen, Puppy Dan, Clovis Wolf, Eldridge Elm, Derek Prey, Elder Being, KC Hawaii, Rob T, Tragic Mermaid, Darren Fishnaller, Cloves Anoya Harris, Roe Underwood, Florida Man Luke, Bethany's Mom, Winter's Kiss, Sam Brooke, The White Stag, Corgi Connection, No Name, Marta Cara, Professor Elm, Kathy Barrickman, Cybard Sands, Steve Hennessy, Melanie Sanders, The Archivist, Rob Smith, Term 4, Naz Razio, J. David Wellman Jr., Parker Lewis, Monica Moya, and DMaster311. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. It really does help out a lot. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.